Thank you. Good morning, everyone here in Stockholm, and greetings to people online, wherever in the world you are. It's great to be here at Stockholm Water Week. There are so many different constituencies, so many interesting people that I've met over the last couple of days. And it really, I think, shows the importance of different stakeholders coming together to promote water stewardship. Our session this morning is going to focus on a particular way to do that, the concept of fair water footprints, which a number of organisations have been working on for the last couple of years with the support of the UK government. So ourselves, IID, Chatham House, Water Witness and the Carbon Disclosure Project. We're going to talk to you this morning about some of the work that we've been doing, looking at how water is embedded in so many of the products that we use every day, and how do we make that extraction and that use fair for communities in low-income countries that are producing many of those goods and services. So we're going to hear from some of our colleagues about some of the research that's gone on, and we then really want to have an active discussion with you about how we can work better together to collaborate to push this agenda forward. So we're going to have some quick fire panel sessions. We're going to use some Mentimeter. So hopefully it'll be an interactive session for you in the room and for those of you online. And hopefully I can get the clicker to work properly here. We've got two really interesting pieces of research, and then we've got the panels that I've talked about. We also want to use Mentimeter, so we're going to do a quick test of that, and we want to use it also to find out who's listening to us today. You should get the QR code, both online and those of you in the room can see it on the screen behind me. If you click on that, then you'll be asked two questions. One, which sector you're from, which constituency, and then also from where in the world you're listening. So that will be a real test to see if who has joined us online, because if everybody's in Stockholm, then we know that it's those of us here in the room. So please do take a moment to do that, and I think our tech people will switch screen for us. Here we go. So the sectors, we've got government, NGO, business, financial institutions, academia, standards, media and others. So please, I can see people in the room have got their phones out, so please do start clicking. And the tech is probably not doing exactly as it should. Let it burn. Okay, perhaps while we're getting the tech to work, those of us in the room, hands up from anybody in government? Oh, great, we've got a couple here, that's excellent. NGOs? Brilliant. Business? Oh, slightly fewer business, perhaps they were out partying last night. Hopefully they'll drift in, we have got a 90-minute session. Academia, here we go, academia. Great. Media, great to have that as well. And then other, yes, wonder who classifies themselves as other in this context. But really great to see that diversity. And I think really highlighting, as I said, that this is something that we want to bring a multi-stakeholder approach to this agenda. And then perhaps this is when we'll discover that it is just those of us in the room, countries that you're based in. So we've got makes it a bit easier to have a closed list here, and I assume the SE is Sweden, so if we can have a quick go at that. But again, perhaps while people are doing, in terms of obviously people in the room, perhaps who has come furthest. Do we have anybody here from the US? Oh, great, yes, we've got a good transnational group. And then from Global South, do we have some African colleagues? Yes, great to see that as well. Anybody come from Asia? Because actually we might have some Asian colleagues joining online. No, that looks like it might be, people have not travelled all the way here, but hopefully dialing in from Asia. So that gives you a sense that we've got a really good spread of the sectors and the different constituencies and partnerships that we want to work with. We've got a reasonable geographical spread, and people are continuing to join us as we carry on. So I now want to move to our first piece of research. So This is work that has been done over the last couple of months. It will be published shortly, but it's really trying to bring evidence to bear, bring new evidence onto the challenges of sustainable water use and water stewardship. So the first research we're going to hear about is from Richard King at Chatham House, where they've been looking at how the water footprint of food and agricultural trade has an impact on the Fair Water Footprint goals. Given time, I won't say too much about Richard. You can read his bio there. But Richard, over to you, and there's the clicker.
Thanks very much, Laura. Good morning, everyone. So I'm just going to paint some very broad brushstrokes to kind of give you an overview of the importance of water footprints within food and agriculture, particularly the traded element, and then Charles and others are going to dive more into the details. So first thing I want to do is just kind of impress upon you just how significant agriculture's water footprints are. So agriculture is that represented by that purple ring around the outside there. And in terms of the sectors that have water footprints, it's by far the most dominant sector. 92% of all blue water consumed is in agriculture. Over half of all grey water used is in agriculture. And you can see from those orange and yellow segments that industry and municipal water footprints are really dwarfed when you compare it with agriculture. And a hugely significant part of agriculture's water footprint is in green water. So a lot of the attention is on blue water, and that's where we've got a lot of the evidence at the moment. But the green water element, so the rainwater, is hugely significant. Just to say that in terms of the crop livestock breakdown, that smaller livestock segment is just purely the livestock themselves. If you think about the feed crops as well, that's encapsulated in the crop element. So that's not a true representation of the division between the sort of animal product sector and the non-animal product sector. That's slightly underrepresented by the way that's presented. But in some, agriculture's footprint, hugely important. Wrong way. If we think about how that water is then used within agriculture, over 80% of global cropland is rain-fed, as I said, so it's green water based. So only around 20% is irrigated, is blue water. In terms of food production, if we think just about food rather than other agricultural products, 60% of global food production is fed by green water, by rain. And then moving into the trade element, looking at both the sort of green and blue together, around 20% of agricultural water use is traded, so what we call virtual water embedded in international supply chains. And that volume has increased by around 3 times in the last 35 years. That trade is obviously hugely important. It can be very beneficial in terms of investment, in terms of jobs, in terms of foreign exchange. And in theory, it should permit much greater water efficiency, so concentrating production in areas where there's abundant use, where there's more sustainable practices, and making sure that can get to places with less sustainable potential. But that's not obviously always the case. So if we look at the breakdown between broadly unsustainable and sustainable blue water, again, just focusing on blue water, over 52% of global irrigation is unsustainable, where the abstraction is greater than the replenishment. And if we look at the trade element of that, around 8% of global irrigation is traded internationally, and around 15% of that is unsustainable. So huge potential in terms of how we move water around in the agricultural sector, but we're not necessarily doing that as efficiently or as sustainably or as fairly as we might hope. Just to come at that from a sort of product by product basis, and the intention here is not for you to read the details of all of these products down the left-hand side, but just to show there is a huge variation in terms of the water footprints of different products. The blue dots show how much is used per kilogram of food product. Purple is per unit of protein, and green is per kilocalorie. And huge variation from the top to the bottom, but also huge variation through space. So the different shades of the different colours are the mean value versus the median value. So you can see the difference between the some of those blue dots at the top, the light blue and the dark blue, huge variation, which suggests there are some significant skews of areas where water is being used incredibly intensively, incredibly inefficiently, versus some of the potential. So what does that mean in terms of what trade enables, or theoretically? It means we have got significant potential to achieve water savings. On the demand side, a lot of that can come through dietary change, through switching which products we consume. On the supply side, a lot of that is around how we improve production practices, how we shift production around different locations depending on their water potential. But obviously, that requires robust water governance. The last thing you want to do is move production from an area which is more efficient volumetrically, but where the potential on a sustainable footing is less. So it's not just that we need to look at the volumes here, we need to think about the fairness, we need to think about the sustainability of that redistribution. And yeah, I mean, the Global Commission on the Economics of Water, one of their missions is precisely around this. How do we think about more regenerative agricultural practice? How do we think about dietary change to improve water use and water fairness? So this is looking specifically at trade over the last 30 years. As I said, it's grown hugely, around 3 times. The big chart on the left-hand side there is the volume of trade. And you can see that some crops have contributed more to that growth. So some of the luxury foods, some of the seeds and oil crops. But then on the right-hand side, that's the unit footprint per ton, per unit weight of food. And as that agricultural trade has grown over the years, the actual per gram per ton use of water in those traded products has actually declined. So what that's telling you is that the trade volumes have massively increased at the same time as the water efficiencies have actually increased. So, and that unit efficiency has generally declined across all products. We don't have the details on the livestock products, but you can see on the luxury foods, there's a bit of an uptick recently. So we are seeing some reversal of that improving efficiency within some of those luxury food products. And yeah, so in theory, this enables countries to maximize their comparative advantage, to circumvent local water scarcity issues, but there is the question, is that actually being borne out in reality? So if we look at some of the distributions of these flows on a bilateral basis, this is showing the exports of unsustainable blue water, and we're looking at food crops here. So it's unsustainable blue water use as traded is dominated by cotton. That accounts for about a third of unsustainable agricultural trade. But if we take the cotton out, if we focus more on food products, then you can see that around 15 countries here are accounting for around 90% of global exports of unsustainable water. So USA, Mexico, Pakistan, India, some of the hugely dominant sources of these unsustainable exports. The colours reflect the countries that they are coming from rather than going to. And if you look at that on a product-by-product basis, some of the most unsustainable traded products here are rice, citrus, wheat, maize, sugar. They account for around 90% of the unsustainable blue water footprint. If we look at the flip side of that, if we look at the imports of food products, it's a bit more distributed, not hugely so, but still we have 20 countries accounting for around 2/3 of global imports of unsustainable water use. And what we're seeing here really is there is quite a wide spectrum across sort of economic development, across geographical areas. This is not just a global north story in terms of unsustainable use. There is a sort of north-south, there is a south-south element here as well. And in terms of some of the particular bilateral flows, Mexico to the US, US to China, US to Mexico, Pakistan to Afghanistan. So quite a broad range here. This is slightly dated data. Charles is sitting on a gold mine of some more updated data, which I might give you a sneak preview of. But in broad terms, this is the kind of global dynamics that we are dealing with. So what does all of this mean? And how do we think about this in period of increasing environmental disruption, increasing geopolitical disruption. We're seeing tariffs put on a lot of this trade. We're seeing export restrictions. We're seeing new forms of protectionism. We're seeing a lot of supply chain fragmentation. That brings with it a lot of challenges, but it brings with it a lot of opportunities about how we think about how we move some of these food products around the world and the water footprint consequences of those. We're also increasingly seeing supply chain resilience increasingly as a security concern. It's not just about ensuring that people have enough calories, but how do we think about protecting those supply chains as the global order sort of fragments and becomes much more disrupted. In terms of some of the environmental concerns, obviously climate change is having a huge impact here, but quite how this plays out over the coming decades remains uncertain. So some thinking is that there may be a decline in trade due to the increasing price of water-intensive crops, or there may be potential for increased water savings from trade as we look at sort of increasingly water-scarce areas. There may be a potential for trade to ensure that there is a much more sustainable use of some of those waters. So particularly a lot of thinking about how wheat trade may can reconfigure. And at the same time, we're seeing changes in patterns of demand. So increasing demand growth from low and middle income countries, the role of China in terms of driving global patterns of import dependencies is declining, and at the same time, the role of India and Southeast Asia is increasing in terms of sort of an increasing part of that driver of global demand. We're also going to see significant expansion of irrigation, question marks as to how sustainable that may end up being, and at the same time, we're seeing changes in global diets. So question marks around how these elements of diet, demand, trade, environmental factors all kind of start shifting these dynamics over the coming decades. But it's obviously going to be hugely important. So in summary, we're going to see virtual water, this trade in embedded water is going to become ever more important, but ever more contested mechanism for conserving water, redistributing food production to areas with sustainable water availability and potential for greater fairness. But at the same time, these sort of very supply chain specific approaches to fair water footprints are increasingly urgent, but that needs to be situated within a locus of greater geopolitical attention. Some of the larger structural factors that I just mentioned are also going to be incredibly important as we think about how to make some of this redistribution of water in food supply chains fair. So with that, I'll hand back to Laura.
Great. Thank you very much, Richard. And I think we haven't even talked about Trump. Obviously, trade is going to have bigger headwinds in the next couple of years. So it's a really important area to be thinking about. Please do think about any questions, clarifications that you have, add them to the Mentimeter. We'll have the opportunity to discuss some of these issues in more depth in our quickfire panels. And I see Charles has already managed to grab the clicker, so I'm going to introduce Charles Wright. No, please just click on to the next slide, which is the introduction for Charles's work. So this is work that Water Witness has been doing, looking at the food and vegetable sector with some really interesting case studies. Charles has recently joined Water Witness, and I think some of the work they've been doing has been really interesting, so great to have this opportunity to share it with you. Charles, over to you.
Thank you very much, Laura. Good morning, everyone, and good afternoon if you're joining online from somewhere else. My name is Charles White, as Laura said, and in something that at one point I'll reflect on is funny, I lost my voice 2 days ago during Water Week, and so I apologize if I'm not sounding my normal self. But if I can't get through the whole presentation, the main punchline is that I'm really excited to share some work that we've been doing. It's the culmination of several years of work that actually started before I even joined Water Witness, where we're synthesizing years' worth of evidence from various different types of data sets to provide actionable insights for different kind of stakeholders to how to improve the water security, which, as I think everyone in this room could appreciate, underpins food security. So that's the main punchline. As many people in this room are well aware, and actually I see a few who have contributed to this literature, recognize, as Richard was saying, is that water footprint sustainability in many parts of the world has lots of areas for improvement. We also already heard that global commissions, including those of the Global Commission on Economics of Water, recognize that we need to have kind of radical changes in our economic systems to improve this water-food security nexus. And so it is actually not surprising to me that I found on a very cursory search for this Water Week this year at least 24 events looking at this connection between food security and water security. So in this context, Water Witness for several years has been looking at the links between virtual water trade, between consuming and producing countries, and the fairness associated with that. This has derivatives, of course, with respect to sustainability, as Richard was alluding to. The big headlines here, which are probably not a surprise to most people, is that a lot of the dependencies on external water use from majority global north countries are unsustainable. And that trajectory, as Richard also alluded to, is increasing in terms of that total external water footprint volumetrically. So what we've been doing, and which started before I came to Water Witness, is a triangulation of evidence, basically. So we look to reviews, desktop literature, obviously, but we try to also inform that with other qualitative measures, key informant interviews, validation workshops, which we did yesterday as well, to try to achieve robust and reliable knowledge. And we've been fortunate enough to have the funding to do this in several of these countries that we're going to be looking at soon, including Peru, which demonstrates that some of these kind of figures on, for example, groundwater extraction, which, by the way, are not limited to the context of Peru, we see this in aquifers worldwide, are actually also captured when we go to the field and see issues related to not only over-extraction, but access to wash as well. And again, just pulling one of these quotes out from our study, which is available on the tables outside, I think speaks to a lot of groundwater challenges that we face globally. The water table is going down and down whilst population is driving urban expansion. The water problems affect everyone here, all types of farmers, the population, and the environment. But there are signs of hope. So Water Witness helped facilitate a YouGov poll of about 2,000 people in June, and there were some positive findings from that, including, excuse me, over 93% of consumers were concerned about the corporate water footprints in developing countries. You can read the rest of these stats as well, but to me, these were signs of hope that, as per recommendations of the Global Commission, of kind of radical change within our systems. But there's a very good quote, and perhaps some of you have heard this from Catherine herself in presentations she gives about climate change and climate change research, that people who reject the science do so not because they lack evidence, but because they see solutions as posing an existential threat. If this feels like it can relate to you, I understand that. So what I've been talking about is kind of the evidence base that Water Witness has been generating for the past few years. What I'm really excited about now is the report that is coming out this fall uses that evidence, but it stacks up on top of that the actions specific to different types of actors to provide actionable kind of results to that. So to get over that hump that Catherine identified. These kind of pathways to establish fair water footprints are outlined by different user groups, really kind of tailored to advocacy asks and actions for them. So here are some previews of some of the data that we're doing. I've been speaking with some of you actually right before we got on stage. We have some recent data. This is from 2023, looking at green water footprints and blue water footprints. You can actually see some of the Ica Valley, which was highlighted in that previous report coming out in southwest part of Peru there. We have been using this to identify kind of hotspots because, as Richard mentioned, some of the kind of interventions between green water and blue water are different from like a policy and research perspective. We were able to also look at the kind of overlap between these and see where the regions who have increasingly high blue water footprint as well as increasingly high green water footprint, and what are the implications in terms of policy there. We have been able to break that down as well in terms of kind of top 10 types of crops, as well as top 10 kind of consumer countries. And here's an example of that, broken down by green and blue water, respectively. Peru is not the only place that we've been fortunate to work at. I just got back from Morocco, again doing a similar kind of style of investigation, coupling desktop research, global models, and then on-the-ground research. Again, we're able to pull out a lot of insights from these global data sets, which are supplementary to that on-the-ground research that I just showed earlier. This provides opportunities to speak with those different types of actors that I mentioned in that slide 5 slides ago. And as a result, we are able to develop case studies. So within this study, we have about 12 of these kind of global scale Sankey diagrams plus bivariate maps, et cetera, of the kind of most up-to-date data. We also have 5 case studies that pertain to specific regions, including Morocco, where we've had on-the-ground research for several years. So in conclusion, and what we're really excited to share with you this fall is this new study, which provides contribution on at least 2 levels. One of those is the actions by stakeholders, and the second one is this decision scaling framework, which helps demonstrate how global level data sets are necessary for certain types of policy decisions, and likewise, on-the-ground informant interviews are also necessary for certain types of policy. And then in the mesoscale, we can kind of blend and mix those methodologies. And we try to demonstrate that with these case studies as well as the global analysis. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Charles. I was just thinking I'm going to have to send you a minute warning, but you completed exactly on time. So brilliant, thank you very much. So we now want to have an opportunity to really drill into, pardon the water pun, some of the issues that this research is throwing up, and think about how we can sort of work together potentially to understand more about these issues and to move into collective action. So we've got quickfire panels on new opportunities, and what we really want you to do is to be thinking about what you've just heard, and as we have our sort of protagonists come up and share some thoughts, think about, questions, challenges to us, but also things that you think, we could do together with you or your constituency. So I think probably the way we best do this is, Richard, if I ask you to leave the stage, and then I'll invite up our protagonists. So first of all, Serene Malik, who's the Executive Director of ANU and is joining us from Africa. It's great to have you with us. And then we have Maria Isabella Cruz Gutierrez, who's the Senior Manager of Water Security at the Carbon Disclosure Project. Welcome, Maria. Please come and join us. And then Nick Hepworth, who is the CEO of Water Witness. We also have somebody, Celine O'Donovan, who's a Senior Associate with Lead Aid, the solicitors. She'll be joining us online, but I think she'll join as her session comes up. So again, please go back to the Mentimeter if you're not already on it. You may have to click a forward button and start thinking about the first question, the first panel, which is around turbocharging collective action at different scales. You saw in Charles's presentation, there's governments, producers, NGOs, lots of different global, national, local scales. How do we really get collective action moving much faster to address the challenges we have at those scales? So first of all, Serene, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Laura. So a couple of months ago in May, we had this very significant event on the continent, which was the Pan-African Conference of Water, #3. And this happens every 25 years. And we had a number of discussions with Water Witness where we were saying that because the Africa Water Vision policy post-2025 was being developed, this was really the opportunity to embed the Fair Water Footprint Initiative in the Africa Water Vision policy. Why? Because it would be able to go across the continent and finally land on the Heads of State Summit in February next year. So we invited Honorable Mia from Malawi, who's been an excellent champion on the issue of fair water footprint. We also had FCDO. Thank you, Andrew and Nick, for mobilizing them. And the question that we were being asked after all the brilliant presentations that had been done, but what is fair? What does it mean? What does fair mean? And a lot of the discussion actually centered around the fairness of water and people trying to understand. So it was really a session where we had to demystify a bit fair water footprint, what fair meant, and what it meant for the continent moving forward. Post that meeting, Honorable Mia took the declaration to the high table, and this for inclusion in the final declaration. Now, there are hints of it, of the elements that were taken in, and the word fair being put in. The government, then the Secretariat, came back to me and asked me again, we need the definition of fair. Going back, sending them back to all things fair water footprint and said, go take a look and see how that works. So that is the discussion we're currently having. But my point is that we were speaking to a lot of people that had no clue about, what this is all about, or whether even this problem existed. Maybe they knew about it, but it was a bit difficult to capture. So I think the first thing in terms of turbocharging collective action is firstly ensuring that everybody understands and that we're all on the same page in terms of what fair water footprint is. I think the evidence, and this is a discussion we've had a lot with Nick, I always say it, that we're constantly told our evidence is not strong enough, but I think after seeing all these reports, I think we've done a pretty good job in trying to quantify and speak to the policymakers and lawmakers who are generally not from the sector in terms of trying to make them understand. So awareness and the way the evidence is being packaged. And third, of course, is the foot soldiers, the work on the ground. And this is nothing new that I'm saying in terms of raising the awareness at the community level, engaging with the various structures that we have, the good old advocacy that we do, but with different type of data. Now, moving forward, we're working on these fronts. In fact, I was just telling Nick, the African Ministerial Council came back and said, we need one of the member states to actually submit something on fair water footprint within the African Union Commission so that it makes it all the way at the top, endorsed by 54 member states, and then comes back to the countries for them to implement. And this, I think, also speaks to how do we turbocharge collective action at that level. At the grassroots level, it's really in terms of having really robust coordination mechanisms, but also messaging. What kind of messaging is actually going on the ground? What kind of channels do we have? The work that we're doing. And finally, this is something that was introduced to us, the focus process versus product. I think it's really critical that we remember, for those that are not in the government, that our job is not product. That is the government's job. Our job is process. And I think this is really in terms of how do we refocus. These are all processes. Yes, there are sub-products in there, but ultimately the delivery of SDG and some of the principles of the fair water footprint fall within the purview of governments. And the reason I'm saying this, and this has been a bit the message that I've been conveying this week, is that we all know that there's a problem in funding process. And the argument here is that what we are doing, the products that come out, are a demonstration for government, and probably have to work a bit more in terms of that demonstration, but also keep the focus on process and supporting them in the delivery of the final product. Finally, interesting discussion I was sharing with Nick this morning. Certain member states had a problem with the word water security, actually the word security. That is something that had to be worked on. I think it was described as too militant. Nick said he's not heard that word in a very long time. But here we are. So this is the other discussion that is being had. So alignment, words matter in this sector, like fair, what does it mean? Security, what does it mean? The evidence, what does it mean? And finally, process versus product, and us shoring up further support for the process to allow them to deliver on the product. Thank you.
That's great, Serena. I mean, really excellent to hear that linkage from the very high levels of the AU through to the very base, the very sort of practical levels of communities on the ground and producers on the ground. So I think a really good provocation for us there. I'm now going to hand to Charles again to just add a few more reflections from some of the work that they've done in relation to this very specific question on collective action. Charles.
Serene, loved that point on how difficult it is to pay for process. I thought that was a really enlightening point. I could share just a really brief story, again, from some work led by Ismail El Hasnoui in Morocco in the Sumasa Valley. For those of you who do not recall the Sumasa in Morocco, if you've ever eaten blueberries or tomatoes in the UK or Europe, there's a high probability that you were eating those from the Sumasa. If you look on kind of Earth Engine, Google Maps, over a time lapse of the Sumasa since like the 80s, you'd see this proliferation of these polygons, these kind of white-looking polygons, and what those are greenhouses. And you just see this proliferation, humongous expansion over the past 4 decades or so. If you go there on the ground and you look under these tarps of greenhouses, you see people working extremely hard with some of the most highly efficient irrigation systems in the world to produce fruit and veg. And yet, the aquifer underlying this area is in decline. And this is indicative of what some of us call the Jevons paradox, which is related to the paradox of irrigation efficiency. So in that context, what Ismail's work is looking at here is what are the types of incentives or policies that are needed to shift water use change behavior from independent, i.e. short-term economic gain, to interdependent, i.e. long-term aquifer sustainability. And this is a hugely important scientific question, again, that crosses aquifers globally. And it does require some strong structures to ensure effective collective action. And so one of the things that he's thinking about is how to nest kind of like a hierarchy of models from kind of frameworks that have a long-standing pedigree within the literature, including Ostrom's design principles, for those of you who are familiar with that, as well as some from the practitioner perspective, including the CEO water mandates integrity principles. And so what he's doing is trying to provide a kind of common framework, this kind of nested set of principles and language on which these diverse stakeholders, again, we're not just talking about farmers, we're also talking about irrigation districts, we're also talking about buyers, producers, as well as the export chain, nesting those together to be able to make that link on that collective action trajectory so that we're all looking for those fair win-wins.
Great, thank you. So 2 different provocations, but around how the different actors along at the different levels can come together. So I'm hoping we might have some things on Mentimeter, but I will also potentially turn to the room. Do we have some Menti questions that have come in? Great. Right. Oh, we've got a lot here. So yeah, I think this thing about the definitions, you can see this, how is fairness defined? Any links to social and climate justice and living income? Yeah, I think that's actually quite a good question, because we've just also heard about workers in Morocco. Yes, they're under tarpaulins. I imagine it's very hot in those greenhouses, and I do wonder what working conditions and wages are like. Serene, what, from your perspective, you talked about the request for definition for fairness. What do you think are some of the things that need to be embodied in a definition of fairness?
First, at the without wanting to sound territorial, I think it's in terms of this movement having, I think, a hand on that particular word, fair. There's an opening in terms of how we can define it. Then once we have done it on our side in terms of what it actually means, then that is a consultation, of course, with all the policymakers and lawmakers and legal in terms of what fair meant in there, if it is even there. So this is really like nitty-gritty work in terms that we had to do in terms of trying to see what was the definition at the African Union Commission level. If it was there, we didn't find it. And how do we actually put it, bring our definition back in there? So very boring work and a lot of, no, not really. Not very exciting because it just requires a lot of reading and going through a number of things and engagements. But I think let us agree on what is fair. But it was more so the definition, but also what is fair in terms of usage. Are we saying, I think based on the presentation that we had, that it's fair that we eat less fruits and produce to keep it fair? Is that what it means? Does it mean you don't have a bath twice a day? Does it mean, so what is fair? I think is something that still requires quite a bit of definition, as you can tell from the rambling that I've just had.
I think that's, that those different dimensions are important. But I'd just like to ask Charles, was there anything in the work that you're doing in Morocco that how are you including workers' rights? Is that an area that it's possible to look at? Also, gender differentiations between women workers and men workers, or actually female and male producers. Anything coming up from the Morocco work or from any of the other areas of work?
The short answer is yes. It's highly important, and one of the kind of outputs of this work that Ismail's doing is actually an agent-based model. And within those models, you do have to define these kind of different stakeholders, what their types of valuations for water is. This gets at the point that Serene was looking at. So yes, highly important and part of the system and the process that we're baking.
Okay, and there's another sort of related question here around efficiency increasing suggests the problem, growing extent of agriculture, not specific crops, but there's a sort of, potential to disenfranchise local farmers in that, particularly if we move to more technologically efficient mechanisms. Charles, perhaps on that one.
And then after this, I will have no voice. This is a really important question, and when I was looking at this, I agree on the point of without disenfranchising local farmers, absolutely. I think the crop type and the expansion are actually both important. So if we look back a couple of years ago, Nature's Sustainability paper looking at the amount of alfalfa that is used in beef production in the U.S., led by Brian Richter. This kind of work demonstrates that it is not only the expansion, but also the type of crops that are grown in a certain region where it's related to this kind of extraction balance. This point also, though, raises a really good point, though, about how the paradox of irrigation efficiency, as well as the reservoir effect. This is, again, Nature's Sustainability Baldesser paper, recognize that the empirical evidence suggests that when you put in more efficiency measures, including irrigation efficiency, including reservoirs, the behavior empirically tends to expand on a false sense of water security. And then when eventually a drought does come, farmers are actually more susceptible to crop failure and stuff. So this is a highly important point. I would just add that I think there's a combination of both the extent as well as the crop, and there's probably an interlocking dynamic between that. Whoever wrote that comment, if you'd like to speak after, okay, it sounded like you. So we can pick this up afterwards if you'd like.
Great, thank you. And before we move on to our next panel, I'd like to sort of pick up this question about moving water from a niche NGO, engineering ecology issue, into society-wide movement. And so, Serene, I'd like to ask for your thoughts on that. You've talked about product and process, but what is it that those of us in this room and listening online, what is it that we can be doing?
I think consumer awareness. There's a lot that needs to be done on that. Now, I think the North is more advanced on, consumer type of awareness, or consumers being a little bit more in tune with how something was produced. South, we're not quite there yet. And I think this is something probably would have to look at, I mean, I'm not sure somebody's really concerned whether, their shirt was produced in a sweatshop somewhere with little children doing it, That's not a question that we ask ourselves. We tend to look at price. Is this cheaper, or does it work? So I think a lot has to do with that. And this is really where I think the private sector alliances, marketing and whatever it is comes in. And this is why I think this particular initiative is quite unique, because it does have the opportunity to pull a lot of players that are outside the sector in the sector as we gain momentum on this messaging. But for governments, and the state, in terms of trying to influence policy or make policies that would fit fair water footprint, this evidence, I think, is really critical. I was looking at this green water, blue water, and basically what was being said. Africa, the backbone of Africa's economy is water. And that is really what needs to be put out there. And our agriculture is rain-fed. So I think once those two come in, that should really get people moving, in my opinion. Yeah.
Great, thank you. So we're going to move on to our next panel now, but I'm going to ask the panelists to stay on the stage. And I think for this panel, I'm going to take some questions from the audience, so don't worry about putting everything into Mentimeter. I realise that we want to make it inclusive for people online, but we also want to get a little bit more from direct engagement from you in the room. So our next provocation is around supply chains and disclosure. So perhaps, again, one of the mechanisms by which we might start to move this issue much more into the policy mainstream. And we're very pleased to have Maria from CDP to share some experiences and provocations. Those of you who don't know CDP, their water work really helps to generate information about what businesses are doing and what investors are looking for around water in business activity. So, Maria, over to you.
Thanks, Laura. Hi, everyone. Good morning. So, first of all, I would like to start with linking this quickfire panel to the topic of World Water Week. So, we are talking about water and climate being inseparable. And climate change is amplifying risk. We've seen it through floods, droughts, risks, and our food supply chains are actually in the front line. For some people, these risks might feel as being, far from us, perhaps, but the truth is that, as Charles mentioned, 50% of the water footprint from the global north relies on unsustainable sources, mostly drawn from places that are already stressed in regions from the global south. This means everything's linked, everything is connected, and this is a supply chain risk, a reputational risk, and a moral risk. Whether we're talking about grapes from Peru or tomatoes from Morocco, tea from Malawi, everything is connected, and it's not something about, it's not their problem, it's our problem. So, as we've mentioned, supply chains are associated with unsustainable use, and this is why they play a big role in addressing water security in a changing climate. Now, equity in the global supply chains lies at the heart of the Fair Water Footprints Initiative, and what we're seeing right now is that there is this big power dynamics. There's an imbalance in the dynamics between the buyers and the suppliers, with small producers, small suppliers in regions that are water stressed, often bearing the worst of the impact of water security, of water stress and unsustainable business practices. But this is actually also, this is where the opportunity also comes. So supply chains are also the lever for resilience. When buyers and suppliers collaborate, this changes the whole game. And I guess, to put it simply, if we have resilient supply chains, we then have resilient communities, and we have resilient businesses. Now, where's the catch? So I'm going to change slide now. Thank you, I forgot to drop this. So here comes the catch. We cannot fix what we can see. So right now, many companies are still flying blind. And this, what you see in the screen, this is CDP data from 2024. In 2024, 70% of water disclosures have mapped or are in the process of mapping their value chain. Now, I'm going to switch this to say that 30% of water disclosures don't know their value chains, are not aware of the relationships between the suppliers, the consumers, the producers, and this is a huge blind spot. A similar case, so this is about full water disclosures, but a similar case happens for the industry of the food, and agri industry. It's a similar stat for them. Now, another one is that when companies integrate suppliers in the risk assessments, they are 7 times more likely to report supply chain risks. And yet, only 21% of water disclosures engage with their suppliers. This is 1 in 5 companies are engaging with their suppliers, mostly on information collection. Another insight that I have here is that the manufacturing, the food, bev, and agri and retail industries are the industries with the greatest vulnerability to supply chain risks, which doesn't come as a surprise, really, from the data. Now, disclosure isn't just about ticking the box. It's about visibility. Without disclosure, or with disclosure, there's awareness of risks, we're identifying opportunities, and we're also building partnerships that can lead to action. And I want to close by saying, so where does that leave us? And so where does this leave us? It means that water security isn't just about making operations efficient. It's about ensuring that the whole basin is resilient. It's about ensuring that we act collectively, that we involve suppliers in decision-making and any other stakeholders that are around the basin. Without data, we cannot see or we cannot know where to act. So data, transparent disclosure, and supply chain action are the levers to uncover risks, to eliminate opportunities, and to drive action for fairness, for food security, and for climate resilience. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Maria. I think that really helps us to sort of see actually what the linkages are between that local level, between those small producers who may be in water scarce areas, and how they feed into the products that we are wearing or eating or drinking. So I'd like to actually go to the audience in the room first for any questions or comments this time. I don't know, I think we've got some microphones. Please just mention your organisation, your name and your organisation. But it would be really good to get people's sort of thoughts on where some of this work could interact with their own areas of interest. So, yeah, we've got a microphone here. So just, please put your hand up. Andy, thank you.
Yeah, brilliant presentations and great new research. My name's Andy Roby. I'm in the Foreign Office and to some extent responsible for this programme, but most of the protagonists are here in the room, so thank you to you. My question's the one actually for CDP and to the private sector, because the people I talk to in corporations are, let's be honest, quite low down in the pecking order in the companies. And how do we get these issues onto the CEO's and the board's agenda?
Thank you, Andy. Maria, let's just that's a good one to take, so please.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. I think that's a very good point. And we've heard through the week as well that how are we bringing these issues to that level? And I think one key thing is to see it as a business opportunity. We need to switch the narrative and ensure that we're not talking just about risks. We need to show that there's visibility and there's opportunity in disclosing and and learning as well about what are all the other opportunities that can be shown through the questionnaire, for example, at CDP, whether we're talking about business strategies, where we're talking about governance or risks and opportunities, or specific things on accounting or measuring and monitoring. So I think it's about selling, or it's about knowing that there's an opportunity in disclosure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions? Yeah.
Yes, I'm Jaap Velm from Water Footprint Implementation. I really like your work. You bring the water footprint concept much further than we did as the Water Footprint Network. But maybe on your question, we also sourcing the water footprint assessment tool, and we just add a new function on it. It's the business function, so that companies can easily calculate their own water footprint. So it's on a smaller scale, and it's also mentioned we want to really give input for the ESG reporting, so that they can make water material for them. And when water is material, you bring it to the board.
Yeah, I think that materiality point is a very important one. I think I'll perhaps take some of the questions and come back. Yeah, thank you.
I'm Patricia Calderon, independent water researcher and consultant. Great presentation. Thank you to the team and fantastic progress. My question is to do with financial institutions, and perhaps this is encompassing the previous presentations, and the role of that they have in using this wonderful data, such as the one that CDP produces, and given now that there has been some roll down of the CSRD, and for example, the role of insurance. And we see that there is, even in Europe, that 50% of there's a report that there is droughts, and that there is a significant insurance gap, and that if it's not being covered, and so potentially that's going to be covered by government. So this really shows that they need to dive into these data more, and it really shows the governance aspect and the role of financial institutions and the financial system really to see more of their supply chains and so forth. So it's more of a comment, but perhaps it's your thoughts.
Great. No, thank you, Patricia. I think that underpinning a lot of this is the financing. There's a question up at the back in the middle. Thank you. And we've got some quite good ones coming in online that echo some of the things that we've heard. So let's take this next one.
Hi there, yeah, my name's Alex. I run an NGO in Malawi, an agricultural NGO, which uses groundwater recharge through rain-fed agriculture as a key catalyst to crop growth. I'm really interested in this, but I'm trying to get the connection for a lot of the work we do, because in Malawi, the main export is agriculture, but it's heavily reliant on imports, especially being landlocked. It's very dependent on stuff coming in. And a big focus is trying to develop that resilience in country, so it's not reliant on imports, growing much more crop diversity and unlocking the potential that is hindered by subsistence farming. And I'm very keen to see how this work would link into that, because we've talked a lot about exports and imports, but not about building resilience within countries, especially in the current climate, literally the climate and tariffs and the impacts that African countries often get hit by wars in Ukraine and such. So I'd be interested to know the comments on how that might work with organizations like ours.
Great, thank you. Really great to get that perspective actually from the ground. I think the question about the use of the tool, I don't know, Nick, would you perhaps pick that?
Sure. Which one?
So the first, the gentleman here from the Netherlands, about companies, doing this sort of using the tool themselves.
Yeah, sorry, I was thinking about the question.
Sorry. Okay, right. You know what? I'll answer the Malawi question, and then we'll come to that one.
Is that okay? I'm very happy to answer that. Sorry, Nick Hepworth, Water Witness International. Great to be here with you. It's a really great question about Malawi, and it's we can respond because part of the programme is to focus on several countries to try and demonstrate what a fair water footprint is. as a founding signatory to the Fair Water Footprints Declaration, we're working with the Malawi government and a bunch of stakeholders there to demonstrate what a fair water footprint means on the ground. And so in Malawi, it's really about ensuring that the agriculture sector, which, as you say, is the mainstay of the economy and most of the livelihoods in Malawi, is based on resilient, sustainable and fair water use. What does that mean in practice? Well, it means adopting the principles of water stewardship so that you're producing crops based on sustainable water abstraction, building resilience to climate change, so looking at things like weather indexed insurance, conservation, regenerative agriculture, so that the crops are more resilient to dry periods, looking at flood warning, flood defence mechanisms, pollution control, and making sure that everybody in the supply chains has access to the human right to water and sanitation. So there's a programme that's underway in Malawi that works with the Chambers of Commerce, so the 500 biggest businesses in Malawi, the central bank, that are implementing a mandatory ESG reporting framework, one of the first in Africa, to ensure that businesses are using water responsibly, and the National Association of Smallholder Farmers, which brings 150,000 smallholder farmers to the table to tell us what they need to be more resilient to climate impacts. So it'd be great to speak to you more, Alex, about your work and how we can link across. There's a lot happening in Malawi right now, and this is an opportunity to bolster those efforts and collaborate and share our learning and impact.
Okay, and on using the tool as companies actually doing it themselves.
Yeah, I mean, it's fantastic to see the proliferation of the water footprint methodology that Hoekstra and before him Tony Allen developed. You know, we're really seeing this catch fire in terms of how companies are understanding and responding to their water risks and opportunities. You know, this week I've been blown away by seeing how companies like North Face, Gap, in the food and ag sector, in the beverage sector, and the maturity that's developing around, right, this is our footprint, this is the risk and opportunity of where that footprint lands, and this is what we're doing about it. There's a real step forward, particularly on things like wash and human right to water. Sadly, it's still that niche set of companies, and part of the work of Fair Water Footprints is to make sure that it's the business norm, not just the exception. But the tool is, the tools are really gathering momentum and pace.
Great, no, thanks, Nick. And I think the sort of business implementing and then business being held to account, and I think this is where a lot of the CDP data can help with that. So the question, the role of finance, but then we've got another one online here. Recommendations that you would give for supplier engagement. So this real sort of how to get that 30% to be actually engaging with their supply chain, and other types of engagement. Do you think that we've got up our sleeves, or what are the tools that we should be using? Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Laura. I think in terms of recommendations for supplier engagement, one of the things I would mention is that businesses need to ensure that they have a procurement team that is focused on this side of things. We cannot just be, there needs to be a dedicated team for this. Another aspect I would mention is that supplier engagement cannot be generalized. We need to ensure that each supplier has a tailored engagement, because suppliers are not the same. In terms of other types of engagement, besides the ones I mentioned information collection, and we can also mention capacity building, financial incentives, rewarding suppliers, and we can also talk about innovation and collaboration, other things that might be created along with suppliers.
Great. I think that's it's good to think about this being really part of a company's core business. So it's the procurement team. It's not a CSR or an ESG team that's doing this work. It really is part of the core business. I want us to sort of move on to our final panel, but just before we do, I just wanted to see if there were any other questions in the room or any reflections on what we've heard. It's often difficult in these kinds of events to get a discussion going, but just from the sort of the questions, the responses from panelists so far, any further thoughts from our audience?
Hi, I'm Kate Brownman with the Global Water Security Center at the University of Alabama. So how do you think we should be prioritizing water when there aren't win-wins? When you're looking at carbon versus water trade-offs or biodiversity or national security, where does water fit into all of this, and how helpful is it to make it a standalone thing?
Very good question. Thank you for that. I don't know which of our panelists would like to to tackle that.
Well, I don't think it's a standalone thing. It's part of the necessity for society to live within the planetary boundaries of sustainability. It's just one other resource that we aren't very good at protecting and using wisely and fairly. But I think what the Fair Water Footprints Programme does is to bring to the fore the geopolitical significance of the profoundly unsustainable water use that we are all depending on, particularly in the global north. And it raises the questions, what do we need to do as responsible nation states, consumers, companies, municipalities to respond to that? And the good news is there's a bunch of mechanisms out there that are available to embed sustainable and fair water use in our economy. It's just that they're not, we need to turbocharge them. We need to make sure that they're mainstream, that they're embedded, that people are held to account against them. So that's what this program is about. We're not saying it's more or less important than climate or nature. We need to act on all these fronts, and hopefully through this program we're trying to provide the tools and some of that focus.
Anybody else want to add on that point? I would just perhaps respond that also getting out of the silos, nature, climate, water is really important. We're in an environment now where resources for this kind of work is declining, so the more the linkages that we can make. And it used to be that you would talk about water and you would perhaps get more attention by talking about climate. Now in some countries it's probably the other way around. You don't want to talk about climate, but you can talk about water. So that's potentially an opportunity to link up. I saw a couple more hands. One here, thank you.
Rich Irwin with Cora. Related to the previous question, to what extent are you not just simply working between nations or within gatherings of nations, but integrating with transboundary organizations, because that's where the water really gets allocated at the end of the day?
Great. No, again, another really good question. Slim?
Yeah, sure. I'll give the example of Africa, because we're a little bit more organized on the continental level than the other regions. So I was mentioning the African Ministerial Council on Water, which is the arm of the African Union Commission. Now, AMCAO equally has on board the various river basin organizations, lake basin organizations, and when you look at their strategic planning and also the outputs on the Africa Water Vision post-2025, yes, transboundary water is a very big key area, especially transboundary water governance, which also speaks to the issue of water security. And this is where we're trying to embed as well, to a certain extent, the fair water footprint. In fact, last week, the executive secretary of AMCAO, gave a very damning presentation where they did find evidence that the shrinking of Lake Sahel, or what was going on within Lake Chad, within the Sahel region, was directly responsible for the movement of course, population, the increased immigration, and the conflict that was actually coming out within that area. So like I said, you do have these big issues at the transboundary level, which speak to peace building and benefits sharing, and I think also the opportunities that we have for fair water footprint in there. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I want to move on to our final panel now, and sorry if there was a little bit of interruption there. Our colleague who's joining online, we were having a little technical difficulty, but we do know that she has been able to join us now. So, the clicker has disappeared. Who has it? Oh, it's moved all the way along there. Thank you. So, our final set of provocations are around what we're calling muscular advocacy to promote positive change. And it's really great to have Celine joining us online from London. She's a senior advocate and solicitor with Lead A. And I think that this is a really interesting tool that we can use to promote the more effective and fair use of water. So Celine, welcome, and over to you. Hopefully the tech will enable us to see and hear you seamlessly.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really pleased to be here. So today I'm just going to give you a 5-minute overview of some of the legal avenues for muscular advocacy to stand up for water and water equity. And then Nick is going to speak to you about a more specific example of a case and where this has been done successfully. So to start with, I think it's worth noting that there are litigious forms of muscular advocacy within the legal spectrum and then non-litigious. At a non-litigious level, there's a huge number of dispute resolution mechanisms that can be used without formal legal proceedings. A lot of them sit internationally and have a strong history standing up for water equity. So, I mean, some that will be very obvious to everybody is the OECD, the recent ICJ opinion that came out, for example, about climate change, but also there was the ITLOS, International Law of the Sea, decision on rights for effectively rights for water in a climate change context. And while they're not my area of practice, if you are looking to engage in muscular advocacy on behalf of people unfairly impacted by, for example, over industrial exploitation of water resources, sometimes taking things to the national level can get a faster response, and sometimes they have a better track record in standing up for more marginalised communities and bringing international stakeholders to the table. But today I'm going to give you more of an overview about the kind of domestic mechanisms that might exist within a specific country. And because it's my area, I'm going to look at the UK. So generally, there's two different ways that you can seek to change behaviour of, for example, large-scale corporate actors who are exploiting water resources. One of them is by trying to challenge the regulator, who often has failed to regulate, and that can generally be done by what we call judicial review, but in every country, more or less, there is some form of public law action where you can challenge governments and regulatory bodies. So some examples of where that's been done from a water perspective in the UK recently were, for example, one in relation to planning. It sounds dry, but often what you want to do if you want to preempt water exploitation before it happens is seek to prevent the actual permission for the development to be granted in the first place, rather than trying to come in at the back end and restore equity once the damage has already been done. So a really good example of that is the UK Supreme Court Finch judgment, where a significant change in planning policy was secured through a litigation that was brought in order to oppose a granted planning application on the basis that climate change had not been properly accounted for because downstream emissions hadn't been considered. And obviously, when climate change is implicated, water equity is inherently very central to the issues. Another example on a slightly more local level was a case last year where simply by bringing a litigation against our Environment Agency, so our regulatory body in England that's responsible for enforcing some of these rules that are set at the government level on the ground, it was held that the Environment Agency had changed their enforcement practices in relation to the farming rules for water, which meant that because this litigation had been brought and shone a light, the regulator had gone from an instance of regulatory failure, preventing farmers from spreading manure too close to watercourses and in excess of agronomic need and causing nutrition pollution, which obviously can destroy watercourses via eutrophication. And they'd started to actually clamp down on individual instances of poor land management, and that was having a positive impact on the river, or so was argued by the court in that case. So in a private law context, and this tends to operate really, aside from injunctions, it tends to operate really only when damage has been done and you're trying to put people back in the position they would have been if the pollution hadn't happened. There are two approaches you can take. There's rights for nature, which is where you sue on behalf of the water itself and the ecosystem itself. That has been very successful and has now been enshrined in some countries, particularly in the global south, but in the global north, we're falling behind the curve, and that option doesn't really exist for us. So if you want to protect water in most of the global north, you really have to think about linking an anthropogenic loss to the environmental degradation. And the best way to do that, really, seeing I'm running out of time, is to find in communities who are the most closely linked in their day-to-day lives with the natural amenity. So indigenous communities are a very strong one because inherently the human loss that they suffer is much more closely linked to water and nature and its health itself. However, more rural communities where, for example, people rely on fishing and swimming for their mental health or connection to a community, even in communities in the global north, can also have a sufficiently strong connection that you could bring a private litigation. You can sue for damages. That tends to have a deterrent effect on pollution, purely due to the scale of loss that tends to have been caused and therefore the amount of money that needs to be paid. You can also, of course, sue for injunctions, and people think of that as a don't do order, so stop polluting, and that is useful. But you can also sue for positive injunctions, and that has been done, where you force defendants to actually, for example, pay for nature-based solutions to clean up the water, and that can reinstate water equity. But the important thing to remember is you need to think at the start with litigation, private litigation, about what lever you want to pull. Because, for example, if you want to deter polluting behaviour by large-scale corporate actors, you want to go for damages. And as a result, you want to be thinking, what are the big businesses that may have been impacted by this, and how can we sign them up as a client in order to get the maximum amount of money at stake? If, however, what you want to do is step in as soon as you can and ask the court to intervene as soon as you can, you don't want to wait until natural damage has filtered up through the economy to the point where it's caused large-scale economic damage, because that takes a long time. So you want to be saying, which of our communities is going to have noticed this impact almost immediately, and what anthropogenic loss can we link that to, so that we can bring the issue before the court as soon as possible. Those are the kinds of considerations we look at when we're thinking about how to engage in legal muscular advocacy in order to create water equity or counteract pollution and climate change. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Really great to hear that potential. Obviously, the legal route and the courts route can be expensive, time-consuming, complex, but it does show that it's a potentially important tool in the toolbox. And we are having a few colleagues move around here. I'm going to hand over to Nick now to add some additional comments in this space. I'm not going to give you the clicker because I think if we change slides, then we're going to lose Celine. Fine. So as Nick has introduced himself already as the CEO of Water Witness. Nick, over to you.
Thanks, Laura. Thanks, Celine. I think before I move on, I just want to spend a moment just to share the working definition of a fair water footprint, just to establish that so everyone's clear about what it is. It's been broken down into 5 components that are analogous with the Sustainable Development Goals and most of the global goals on water, and that is that a fair water footprint is one that demonstrates zero pollution, so zero negative impact on downstream use, not zero discharge, but zero negative impact. Where all workers have the human right to water and sanitation and hygiene, where it's climate resilient, where there's protection and promotion of nature, and when the footprint is based on sustainable and equitable water withdrawal. The sustainable bit is relatively easy to define from a hydrological perspective. The difficult bit is the equitable question. And the approach we're taking today is to really ask people in the basins where water use is ongoing whether they consider that water use to be equitable and in the public interest. What fair water footprint is about utilising, the reason we've got unfair water footprints is because of governance failures, corporate governance failures, financial governance failures, national government failures. You know, decent water law's been around for a long time. It's just not being implemented. And so this initiative is about pulling multiple levers to try and get us to a place of shared water security as quickly as we can, because that's what we all need. And so we're working with, you know, the finance sector, the corporate sector to get water stewardship moving. But we're also looking at working with legal experts like Lee Day to look at what tools are in the box to try and use the law to get fair water footprints out there in the rest of the world. Now, governments that are responsible for regulating water use struggle. And our analysis shows that they generally get about 10% of the budget that they need to enforce water resource law. And so in many countries, our water footprints are unsustainable. So one of the options available to us is to use transnational law and strategic litigation to call out and call people to account for unsustainable water use. And that's the opportunity that we have through working with Lee Day. And we, you know, the deterrent effect that has and the case law that we can establish to send the message through the private sector and the finance sector that they need to take this seriously. And it's to Andy's question, how do we get this in the C-suite and with senior decision makers? All the corporate partners we work with tell us that if there's legal jeopardy, or you get us on the front page of The Guardian, hey, that gets you right to the top of the risk matrix and gets action and investment on these issues. So look, that's that's the opportunity that's available to us. I've got a quick slide to demonstrate the case that I want to talk about. Sorry, Salim, we might lose you for a second or two, but I just want to show you the. This is the Shire Valley in southern Malawi, where Associated British Foods and Ilovo, Africa's biggest sugar producer, have a 20,000 hectare sugar estate that supplies the supply chains of Europe and the UK with sugar. 3 years ago, I think they increased their resilience to climate change by heightening a dike around this 20,000 hectare plantation in a floodplain. Any elementary student of geography will tell you that if you disturb the floodplain function in that way, you're going to intensify flooding outside of the area that's protected by the dike. And that's exactly what happened. And the modelling shows that action intensified flooding for thousands of villagers and led to the deaths of 8 people in the village of Kansechi. This is a case that we felt ethically obliged to take to Lee Day, given the fatalities. And they're acting on behalf of the Kansechi villagers to take the case in the High Court in London, and the case will be heard in November. We'll give you an update on what happens. But it's a really important example of where companies are building resilience to climate change in their supply chains at the expense of local communities, and that is not a fair water footprint. It's an important touchstone globally to demonstrate the importance of double materiality when businesses are responding to these issues, that they've got to consider risks that they impose to others as well as the incoming risks. And this is only going to get more important as climate change intensifies. So, you know, we're not chasing down corporates all over the place. We're trying to work constructively, but there is room for the proportionate application of law, and tort law and damage law to get these cases dealt with, and to take these issues much more seriously in terms of accountability in our supply chains. One thing that the Fair Water Footprints programme is supporting is the ability of civil society around the world to go and find cases like this and to hold governments and businesses to account for a fair water footprint. So the team here, led by Gina, is working through the Fair Water Action Fund. So this is a mechanism to channel technical, legal, and financial support to civil society to do this important work. Previously, there was no mechanism to support the networks that Serene represents. Really exciting. The demand is strong. The need is out there. We had 835 applications to this grant facility from over 100 countries, right? what fantastic potential to move the bar on these issues and to get these issues identified and acted upon in the multiple ways that we can provide. So if anybody's interested in learning more about the Fair Water Action Fund and supporting it, please come and chat to us. But it's a great example of how this programme is delivering practical action on the ground.
Great, thank you, Nathan.
Oh, I need to say, of course, Associated British Foods deny this, and this is all alleged until we hear the outcome in the High Court later this year.
Yes, under all the usual legal caveats, but I think a really great opportunity to hear the potential of the legal route, but also this very practical example. And I think this, we just touched a bit on water and climate change, the potential for this kind of thing to happen more broadly. That's the kind of thing that we really don't want to happen. We want to learn from these experiences. So I'm hoping that if I use the clicker, we will get to the Mentimeter questions. Another picture from Shure. And yeah, so I'm going to have to turn around and look at these. So perhaps, given what we've been talking about, the largest corporations not having a clue about their water footprints, only water consumption or risks, should they disclose their detailed water footprint impacts to act locally? What do the panel think about that?
Who wants to say that one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so largest corporations don't have a clue of their water footprint as they disclose only water consumption or water risks. Shouldn't they disclose the detailed water footprint impacts to act locally? I think they actually do. So there is, at least through CDP questionnaire, there's a lot of information that they are disclosing, but perhaps the link is not there in terms of saying, this is your water footprint. They disclose their withdrawals, they disclose their consumption, their risks, opportunities. They also disclose part of whether the water pollution, if they have water pollutants, hazardous substances. So I think perhaps the missing link is calling this water footprint, but I do think they actually disclose it.
Great, thank you. Clarification, what do we mean by muscular advocacy? I suppose it's I don't think it's a term that's out there. I think it was something that we wanted to use.
Yeah.
We probably want to get it out there more.
No, we only just invented it, but it's basically to refer to, the civil society does lots of important work around generating evidence and ensuring that people's voices are heard at multiple scales in all types of governance, including water. And there's often a romantic notion that if you speak truth to power, the power responds. But that's quite a romantic idea, because as somebody else has pointed out, it's about money, right? Money. This is largely about making sure that our supply chains are managed fairly, and power is resilient to soft advocacy. So what we're talking about with muscular advocacy is legal action, using mechanisms like the OECD complaints mechanism, trade agreement complaint mechanisms to raise the bar, to say, look, or to raise pressure, to say, look, this is, the soft advocacy isn't working, we're going to hold you to account for compliance around water management. So that's what it means. We'll define it in a paper soon, I'm sure, but it's really about using the stick.
Great. No, I think a good point to bring us to a conclusion on. And if you do want to find out more about, I think I've gone too far, fair water footprints, and to collaborate with us, it is all on our wonderful website, which has recently been updated and will be containing a lot of the information. We'll probably have some of the slides and the materials from today on there. So do please take a look at that. Think about how you might be able to engage with us, how the constituencies that you're part of could become engaged. Also, because it's something that we always try to do, is to get some evaluation on our events. So going back to the Mentimeter, there is a again. There's a short evaluation questionnaire there, so what you've thought about the way we've organised this, some of the content you've heard. Here we go, the questions are coming up, so also to get an idea of the sort of the constituents that we've had in the room, but you can fill that in your own time. I don't think I can do any justice to the breadth of knowledge that we've had today and the panelists and the perspectives that they have brought. But I think, as Nick and Shireen were saying, this is really about fairness and justice at the local level. It's about producers who are involved in agriculture, textiles, mining, producing goods and services that are essential for our everyday lives, and finding ways to support them and to conserve a vital resource. So we are supporting people and planet is one of the key things that we want to achieve through the Fair Water Footprint work. So thank you all very much for joining us today. Please join me in thanking our wonderful panel and speakers. And we hope to be able to collaborate with you in future. Thank you.